It had been a year and a month since she'd returned his lost dog in the rain and walked away without giving her name. And now the man who had spent every one of those days finding her again was standing at the end of the breakwater. And Eleanor refused, for one more breath, to turn around. The wind off Wexley Cove came in sideways that last afternoon, carrying salt and the iron smell of coming rain, and snapped her coat around her knees. And still she watched the water instead of him. She knew his step on the wet stone. She had learned it over 6 weeks without meaning to. The dog reached her first, a small grey shape skidding across the slick granite to lean his whole weight against her shins, the way he always did, as if her legs were a wall he had been promised. She put her hand down into the rough fur without looking, because looking would mean looking up, and looking up would mean the man behind the dog. "You found me," she said to the harbour. Her voice did not shake, which surprised her. "It took you a year." A little more than a year. Elliot Crane stopped an arm's length away, close enough that the wind brought her the cold coffee, rained-on wool smell of him, far enough that she could have walked into the water and he would not have caught her. He had learned distances too. 391 days, if you want the number. I stopped being able to round it down a while ago. Then she did turn. The rain started exactly then, the way it had a habit of doing around her, fine and grey and forgiving, and she looked at the man who had given away more than she had known a person could give, in order to stand on a broken pier in a town with one stoplight and one cafe. And she asked him the only question she had left. "Why?" she said. "Why would you try that hard, for a stranger who wouldn't even tell you her name?" And Elliot told her. What he told her stopped her cold. And to understand why, you have to go back, past the breakwater, past the cafe, past the whole strange and tender year of his searching, to a different stretch of bad weather 13 months earlier, and to a dog who had simply, in the way of dogs, run. 13 months earlier, on the kind of October night that turns a city the colour of slate, Elliot Crane stood inside a house too large for one man and discovered that his dog was gone. Otis was not a dignified animal. He was the wrong dog for the house entirely, a 14-pound mess of grey terrier and supermarket biscuit, rescued 4 years before from a shelter Elliot had walked into on a bad anniversary, and never managed to walk out of unchanged. The house had been built for a different kind of dog, the kind that matches the floors. Otis matched nothing. He slept in the one cracked leather chair Elliot refused to let the decorators take, and he was, on most days, the only living thing in 12,000 square feet that wanted Elliot home, for reasons that had nothing to do with what Elliot owned. That night, a side gate had been left unlatched by a contractor, and the wind had done the rest. And by the time Elliot noticed the chair was empty, the rain had already started. He did the things a man does. He went out into it in a coat worth more than some cars, and called a name into the dark that the dark did not return. He woke the night staff. He drove the wet streets at 5 miles an hour with the window down, getting soaked, feeling foolish, feeling, and this was the part that frightened him, standing at a red light with rain coming through the open glass, feeling something close to grief, which was absurd, which was only a dog, except that it was not only a dog, and he knew it, and could not have said so to a single person alive. He turned his mother's watch around his wrist, the plain steel one she had worn through years that had no money in them at all, the one his father had called cheap, and his mother had called hers. He turned it the way he did when a thing he could not buy his way out of had its hand on his chest. The doorbell rang at 9:15. He almost did not hear it over the rain. When he opened the door himself, the staff astonished, no one rang the front of this house, people were announced at gates. There was a young woman standing under the portico light, soaked to the bone, holding his dog. She held Otis the way you hold something you have decided to be careful with, wrapped in the lining of her own coat, so that she stood there in shirt sleeves in the cold, with her hair flat to her skull and rain running off the end of her nose, and the dog's ridiculous face poked out of the bundle perfectly dry. "He had a cut on his back left pad," she said, Before hello, before anything. Glass, I think. I cleaned it and put a little pressure dressing on. It's nothing. It'll heal in a few days. But don't let him chew it. She looked past Elliot into the marble hall, the chandelier, the staircase that curved up into money, and something in her face closed like a shop at the end of a long day. I found him on Harlow Street, 3 blocks down. He had a tag with this address. So, here. She held the dog out. Elliot took it. Otis, who distrusted nearly everyone, licked the woman's wrist once as he changed hands, a small betrayal, and then settled against Elliot's chest with a grunt of pure proprietary contentment. And Elliot stood holding 11 warm pounds of relief, and could not, for a moment, speak. "Thank you," he managed. Thank you. You came out in this. You wrapped him in your own coat. He was shivering. You're shivering. She glanced down at herself as if she had not noticed, which he believed. I'm fine. I should go. Wait, please. He shifted the dog to one arm. The other hand was already moving, the old reflex, the only language the house had taught him for gratitude. At least let me call you a car. You're soaked. And there's a reward, obviously. I'd posted a reward. It's the least. It was the wrong word. He knew it was the wrong word before it finished leaving his mouth, watched it land on her face, and do its damage. Something there went from tired to flat, from a person to a transaction, and she took a step back from his door and out from under the light. He's a good dog, she said. He doesn't care what your gate cost. You should latch it. A small dry curl at the corner of her mouth that he would spend a year trying to see again. He has no taste. It's probably why he likes you. At least tell me your name. Why? So I can thank you properly. You just did. She was already turning, already 2 steps into the rain, the lamplight sliding off her wet shoulders. Good night. Latch the gate. Wait! But the dark had her. She crossed the wet street without hurrying, the way someone walks who has decided not to run because running would mean it mattered. And she did not look back. And Elliot Crane stood in the doorway of his enormous house, holding his small, ridiculous dog, and watched a stranger refuse everything he had to offer and disappear, and discovered that he was not, after all, a man who could let that be the end of it. He did not sleep. He told himself it was the storm. In the morning, he stood in his glass kitchen with coffee going cold in his hand, watching Otis limp self-importantly to his bowl on the dressing she had made, and he found he could reconstruct almost nothing about her. Not her name, not the color of her eyes. Brown, he thought, but the light had been bad. He had her words, though, all of them, with a clarity that unsettled him. He doesn't care what your gate cost. He had been handed those words by people his whole life dressed up in 100 flattering ways, but no one had ever simply said the true thing to him in the rain and then walked away from his money as if it were a draft under a door. Margot found him still standing there at 9, in yesterday's shirt. You look, his estate manager observed, setting down the Morning Post, like a man who slept in a hedge. Marguerite Sully had run the back of Elliot's life for 6 years, and had never once been impressed by the front of it. She was somewhere north of 60, and had buried a husband and 2 illusions, and dispensed her affection in the form of accurate insults. Shall I assume the dog is found, or are we still in mourning? He's found. Elliot set the cold coffee down. A woman brought him back, last night. She'd dressed a cut on his foot and walked him 3 blocks in the rain, and wrapped him in her own coat. And when I offered her the reward, she looked at me like I'd offered to buy her hair. Margot's eyebrows performed a small, eloquent migration. How appalling. A stranger with standards. In this neighborhood. I'll have the locks changed. I didn't get her name. Then she's a sensible woman who knows a complicated man when she meets one. Margot began sorting the Post into the piles only she understood. Drink something warm, Mr. Crane. People are always knocking on this door. One of them was bound to be a human being eventually. He drank something warm. he went to work. He sat through a meeting about a waterfront the company was buying in a city he would never live in, and a man across the table said the numbers tell the story with great confidence. And Elliot thought, without deciding to, he doesn't care what your gate cost, and looked out the window at the rain that had not stopped, and understood with a quiet, vertiginous certainty that he was going to find out who she was. He told himself it was so he could thank her. That part, at least, he eventually stopped believing. The trouble was that she had been very good at leaving no trace, and Elliot Crane was a man for whom finding things was supposed to be easy. This was the thing his father had built and left him, a machinery of finding. Crane Harbor moved freight and bought waterfronts, and knew, in the way large companies know, an enormous number of small things about an enormous number of people. Gerald Crane had taught his son that the world was a ledger, and that anything in it could be located if you were willing to read every line. Gerald had located, in his life, a great many assets, and not one single thing that loved him, and had let go 3 years ago in a private room with a view he was too far gone to see, leaving Elliot a fortune, a method, and a particular kind of loneliness that ran in the family like a jaw. So Elliot did the thing he knew how to do. He had the gate camera footage pulled. The rain had ruined it. She was a hooded smear crossing into frame, and a hooded smear crossing out, carrying a bundle, and the timestamp told him only what he already knew. Harlow Street had a few cameras. She did not appear on them in any way that resolved into a person. She had walked into his life, out of the weather, and walked back into it, and the machinery of finding turned over and caught nothing. And that should have been the end of it. It was the dog who gave her away. 3 days after the storm, taking Otis to be properly looked at, the cut was healing exactly as she'd said it would, which annoyed his expensive vet. Elliot mentioned, idly, the dressing. The vet peeled it back and went quiet, in the particular way of a professional recognizing another professional's work. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, the vet said. This is a proper pressure wrap. Cleaned, the right tension, the right materials. That's not a kind stranger with a first aid kit. That's training. Vet tech, nurse, EMT, something. He looked at the neat edge of the tape. You said she found him 3 blocks over. It was not much. It was a profession-shaped hole where a name should be. But Elliot had spent his life turning small certainties into large ones, and he went home and did not call the agency his father would have called, the kind that finds people, whether or not the people wish to be found, the kind that left a taste in the mouth, and instead sat with it. He thought about a young woman walking the rain in shirt sleeves, competent and quick and gone. He thought about, he doesn't care what your gate cost. And he found that the thing he had built his whole working life around, the locating of a person against their will, the reading of every line, was the one tool he was not willing to use on her, because using it would make him exactly the man she had looked at on his own doorstep and stepped back from. So he found a different way, and it took longer, and it changed him, which is the part of the story that the title leaves out. He started with the dog. He printed 100 flyers, the genuine kind. Found, then lost again, my thanks, with a photo of Otis looking aggrieved and a line that said only, "To the woman who brought my dog home in the rain on Harlow Street. I never got to thank you. No reward, just thanks." He put them in the windows of the things a person on foot in that part of the city would pass. The laundromats, the bodegas, the 2 animal shelters, the free clinic, the vet tech's break rooms when they let him. He felt absurd doing it, a man in a coat like his taping paper to glass. And he did it anyway. And Margot watched him leave with a roll of tape in his pocket and said nothing, which, for Margot, was a kind of blessing. No one called. He had not really expected anyone to call, but somewhere in the doing of it, something in Elliot Crane came quietly off its hinges. He had spent 3 years since his father's death being the front of the house, The name, the face, the gait. Taping flyers in a laundromat at 10 at night, with the dryers turning their warm iron breath into the room, and a tired man folding scrubs in the corner, who nodded at him like an equal. Elliot felt, for the length of an evening, like a person and not a position, and he wanted more of it. He had not known he was starving until someone in the rain had handed him a plate. The search became, without his quite admitting it, a re-examination of the entire architecture of his life. He stopped flying private when a commercial seat would do and discovered conversations. He started going into the warehouses Crane Harbor owned and learning the names of the people who actually moved the freight, which embarrassed his executives, who had a whole language for why he should not. He funded, quietly, a string of low-cost animal clinics across 3 states, telling the board it was brand goodwill, telling Margot nothing, telling himself it was decent regardless of motive, and meaning, underneath all of it, if she is anywhere near an animal in trouble, let there be a door open near her, and let it have my hand on it somehow. "You've gone strange," his chief operating officer told him in March, not unkindly. Daniel Okafor had run Crane Harbor's daily life for 2 years and watched his chairman drift from the spreadsheets toward the loading docks with a worry that was beginning to curdle into something sharper. "The board's noticed. You've handed me half your portfolio, and you're spending your time on, forgive me, dog clinics and warehouse floors. People are asking what you're doing." "I'm finding out what the company is actually for," Elliot said, which was true and was not the whole truth. And Daniel went away unsatisfied, because half a true answer from a man who used to deal only in full ones is a thing that makes careful people nervous. The board grew restive. There were lunches Elliot did not take, and calls he did not return, and in the background, a slow tectonic shifting, the kind that precedes the kind of meeting where men with fiduciary duties decide a founder's son has lost his grip. Elliot felt it the way you feel weather coming, and did not, to his own surprise, much care. He had spent his life holding the wheel of a thing his father built so it would not crash, and he was beginning to suspect he had mistaken the wheel for the road. Spring became summer. The flyers yellowed and came down. No one called. And then, in the second week of August, a clinic he had funded in a fishing town 4 states up the coast sent its quarterly report, the kind no one reads, and a young tech on the staff had filed a note. Clinics he funded ran a small program. "Bring in a stray, we'll treat it free." And the note said a gray terrier mix had been brought in months back, paw laceration, treated and released, brought by a young woman, not the owner, who had cleaned and dressed the wound herself before walking in and apologized for doing the clinic's job, and who had given, when pressed for a name for the form, only an initial and a town 20 minutes up the coast. N. Doyle, Wexley Cove. It was the dressing. It was always going to be the dressing. She could change her name, change her city, walk into weather and out of it without a trace. But she could not stop being the kind of person who treats a wound properly and apologizes for the trouble. And that, not the cameras, not the ledger, not a single thing his father had taught him, was what found her. Elliot read the note 4 times. Then he sat for a long while in the cracked leather chair with the dog asleep against his ribs. And he understood that he had come to a door, and that walking through it would cost him things he had spent a lifetime being told were the only things that mattered, and that he was going to walk through it anyway. He did not call ahead. There was no ahead to call. He told Daniel he would be reachable but not present for a while, and absorbed the silence on the line. He told Margot he was going up the coast. "For the dog woman," Margot said, not a question. "For the dog woman." Margot looked at him for a long moment. She had watched him grow a year stranger and kinder, and more unreachable to the men who wanted to reach him, and she had her own opinions about what that meant. Opinions she kept the way she kept her affection, in a locked place with the key visible. "Take the dog," she said finally. "If you find her, the dog will do more than you will. You're a fool in a good coat, Mr. Crane. But you become a better fool than you were. Latch the gate on your way out." He almost asked her what she meant by that last part. He understood, eventually, that she had simply heard him tell the story enough times to use the stranger's words back at him. He put Otis in the car and drove north, out of the city, toward a town with one stoplight he had never heard of, with no plan beyond the one thing he had become certain of over a year of taping paper to glass: that he was not going to walk up to her like a man who had hunted her down. He was going to let her not know him the way she had let him not know her, and he was going to find out if a person could be wanted in this world for nothing he could put on a form. Wexley Cove was a working harbor pretending to be a postcard, or a postcard that had given up and gone back to work. Elliot could not decide which, and decided he liked it either way. Lobster boats and a marina that had seen better paint, one stoplight that the locals treated as a suggestion, a main street of clapboard fronts, a hardware store, a church, and at the end of it, where the road met the water, a cafe called The Hold, with a hand-lettered sign and steam on the windows even in September. He took a room above the hardware store from a widower named Pell, who asked no questions, and he did not go to the cafe for 2 days, because he had driven a year to get there and discovered that he was afraid. When he finally went, on a bright, cold morning with Otis on a length of rope because he'd forgotten the leash, he pushed open the door of The Hold into a wall of warmth and coffee and frying onion and the low roar of fishermen at the end of a tide, and he saw her behind the counter, and the floor of his stomach went out from under him as cleanly as a trapdoor. She was laughing at something a huge bearded man at the grill had said. She wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves shoved up, and her hair was longer than he remembered and tied back with what appeared to be a piece of butcher's twine. And she was pouring coffee with one hand and ringing up a man with the other, and she looked... This was the thing that undid him. She looked at home. She looked like a person who lived inside her own life. The woman on his doorstep had been soaked and closed and gone. This woman was lit from within by belonging to a place. And Elliot stood in the doorway with a dog on a rope and understood that he had spent a year imagining he was looking for someone who needed to be found, and that she had not needed it at all. Then the dog ruined everything, or saved it. Otis caught a scent, lunged the length of the rope, towed Elliot 3 steps into the cafe, and threw himself at Eleanor's shins with the bottomless joy of a creature who has located something he was promised. She came around the counter laughing. "Well, hello! Where did you come from?" And crouched, and the dog turned himself inside out, and her hands went into his fur, and for one terrible suspended second, Elliot waited for the recognition to break across her face like dawn. It didn't. She didn't know the dog. Not consciously. She'd dressed a cut on a paw in the rain a year ago, and treated a grey stray at a clinic months back, and she met 200 dogs a season in a harbour town, and the part of her that knew this one was the same one was buried under a year of deliberately not looking back at anything. She just liked him, the way she liked all of them, with the slightly fierce tenderness of a person who has decided that animals, at least, are safe to love. She looked up past the dog at the man holding the rope, ready to make the joke she made to every summer person, and the joke fell away from her, and Elliot saw her go still. She didn't know the dog, but something in her knew something, and her hand paused in the fur, and she looked at him a beat too long. "He likes you better than me already," Elliot said, because he had to say something, and because he had spent a year learning how to be unimportant. "It's all right. He has no taste." He had not planned to say it. The words came up out of the rainy doorstep on their own. He watched them cross the cafe and land somewhere behind her eyes, in a place she couldn't reach fast enough to guard. And for half a heartbeat, the whole year balanced on the edge of that sentence. Then she laughed, a little off, a little careful, and stood, and the moment let go of them both. "No taste at all, clearly. Look at the company he keeps." She wiped her hands on her apron. The wariness was there, but folded back, filed, a thing to think about later. "First time in the Cove. You've got the look. Sit anywhere that isn't Sully's stool." He bites. "Coffee?" "Coffee. And whatever's making that smell." "That's the hash. You'll want the hash." She was already moving, already pouring, the harbor's rhythm closing over the strange moment like water over a dropped stone. "I'm Nell. That's Sully." The bearded grill. "He owns the place and his manners. You staying long?" "I don't know yet," said Elliot Crane, who knew exactly how long, who had taken a room above the hardware store with no end date, and who had just decided, in the space of a poured cup of coffee, that he would burn the entire architecture of his old life to the waterline before he would tell this woman a single true fact that came with a price tag. "I'm Eli," he said. "I'm between things, honestly. Just driving the coast. Needed to be somewhere that wasn't where I was." "Plenty of that here," said Nell. "We're the leading exporter of it." She set the coffee in front of him, and the wariness ghosted across her face one more time, and she pushed it down one more time. And somewhere under both their feet, a thing began that neither of them had any intention of allowing. "Hash is up in 5. Tie your no-taste dog to the rail. The health inspector's a romantic, but he's still the health inspector." He tied the dog to the rail. He ate the hash, which was the best thing he had eaten in a year, possibly because it was, possibly because she had handed it to him. He stayed until the lunch rush thinned, and he came back the next morning, and the one after that. And Eleanor Ashby, who had run from one of the largest fortunes on the eastern seaboard to be no one in a town that asked nothing of her, wiped down the counter each day a little more aware that the quiet man with the no-taste dog was the first thing in 2 years she had looked forward to, and a little more afraid of what that meant. September in Wexley Cove was a slow tide going out, the summer people gone, the light turning hard and gold, the harbor settling into the long private business of itself. Elliot Crane, who had never had an unscheduled month in his adult life, discovered that he did not know how to do nothing, and that Nell Doyle was going to make him learn whether he liked it or not. He made himself useful, because being useless made him a man with too much time to be recognized. He fixed the cafe's back screen door, which had hung wrong since before Sully bought the place. He turned out to be good with his hands, in a way that surprised everyone, including himself. His father had paid other people to be good with their hands, and Sully, who trusted machinery faster than people, began leaving small broken things where Eli would find them, which is how a gruff man says, "Stay." "He's not running from the law," Sully informed Nell one evening, scraping the grill, as if she'd asked. She hadn't. "Man who fixes a door that isn't his isn't running from the law. He's running from money. You can always tell. The money ones don't know how to sit still, and they tip like they're apologizing for something." He scraped. "I like him. Don't tell him." "I wasn't going to talk about him at all," said Nell, who had been thinking about almost nothing else, and who heard running from money and felt the floor of her own carefully built life tilt half a degree, because she knew that particular thing from the inside, and the knowing was not a comfort. Because here is what Eleanor had been running from, and it is the thing the man chasing her could not have guessed, the thing that would, when it finally surfaced, stop them both cold. She had not run from poverty. She had run from more money than even Elliot Crane had ever held. Eleanor Ashby was the only granddaughter of Vivian Ashby, who had taken a single shabby seaside hotel after the war and built it, over 50 years and with a will like a glacier, into the Ashby Group, 40 properties on 3 continents, a name you saw lit up over the most expensive corners of the most expensive cities. A fortune so old, it had stopped feeling like money to the family and started feeling like weather. Eleanor had been raised inside it, the way a pearl is raised inside an oyster, as the answer to an irritation. She had been, from the age of 6, an asset, a merger waiting to happen. Her grandmother loved her, in the way Vivian loved things, fiercely, possessively, as an extension of the Empire's future, and had arranged, by the time Eleanor was 26, for that future to be secured through marriage to Crispin Vale, whose family hotels would, joined to the Ashby name, make a thing too large to ever fail. Crispin was not cruel. That was almost the worst of it. He was handsome and pleasant, and entirely a creature of the arrangement, and he had looked at Eleanor across a dozen dinners with the warm, untroubled regard of a man examining a sound investment. And on the night before the engagement was to be made public, Eleanor had stood in a ballroom, full of people celebrating the joining of two balance sheets, and realized that not one person in the room, not Crispin, not her grandmother, not the 400 guests, could have told her the name of a single thing she loved. She was a position. She had always been a position. And she had walked out of the ballroom, and out of the building, and out of the entire shape of her life, taken almost nothing, told no one, and become, by degrees, a young woman called Nell Doyle, who had trained as an EMT in a city far away, and then drifted up the coast and learned to dress a dog's paw in the rain, and to want nothing she could not carry. 2 years she had been now, 2 years of being no one, which had turned out to be the freest she had ever felt, and the loneliest, both at once. Because the price of being unfindable is that you let no one in deeply enough to find you. She had built a life out of small true things, the harbour, the hash, the dogs, Sully's terrible jokes, and she had built it on a foundation of one rule: never need anyone enough that their leaving would cost you, and never let anyone need you enough to ask where you came from. And now there was a quiet man with a no-taste dog who fixed doors that weren't his, who tipped like he was apologizing, who had said he has no taste, it's why he likes you, on his first morning, with a familiarity she could not place, and could not stop turning over, and who looked at her. This was the dangerous part, as if she were a person and not a position, which was the one thing she had run 2 years and 4 states to find, and the one thing she no longer believed she was allowed to keep. "You're doing the thing," Sully said, hanging up his apron. "The thing where you decide something's going to go wrong so you don't have to enjoy it going right." "I don't do a thing." "You do the thing, constantly. You've done the thing since the day you walked in here looking over your shoulder." He paused at the door. He had never once asked her what she was looking over her shoulder at, which was why she had stayed. "Whatever you're running from, Nell, it's not him. I've watched a lot of people come in off that road. He's not chasing you. He's lost, the same as you are." He went out into the dark. "Lock up and eat something, you're getting that look." She locked up. She did not eat something. She stood in the empty cafe with the harbor breathing against the pilings outside and thought, "He's not chasing me," and was right, and was so completely, catastrophically wrong, and had no way to know it yet. He took her to dig clams, because she said he wouldn't be able to, which was the closest thing to a dare either of them had risked. It was the first time they were alone, away from the cafe, on a flat at low tide, a mile up the shore where the mud smelled of sulfur and salt and old rain, and gave up its clams only to people who knew where to look. And Eleanor knew, and Elliot did not. And the spectacle of a competent man kneeling in mud being thoroughly bad at something undid a knot in her she had not known was tied. "You're insulting them," she informed him, watching him dig. "You have to come at it sideways. You're a man who's never had to sneak up on anything in his life. It shows." "I sneak up on things constantly." He was filthy to the elbows and, she noted with alarm, delighted, in the unguarded way of a person doing something with no audience that matters. "I'm extremely subtle." "You drove into the cove in a car that costs more than Pell's whole building, and you've got hands that have never held a rake. You're as subtle as the lighthouse." She reached past him, sank her own rake at the angle the mud wanted, and turned up 3 clams in one pull, just to watch his face. There, sideways. Show off, says the man, and she heard herself say it warm, say it easy, the way you talk to someone you've stopped guarding against, and she felt the danger of it like cold water finding a gap in a boot, and she kept digging, because stopping would mean looking at it. They dug. The tide turned slow, and in the long flat light, kneeling in the mud, they talked the way people talk when their hands are busy and their eyes have somewhere else to be, sideways, like the clams. He told her, Eli told her, about a father who had measured everything, including his son, in returns. He did not have to invent it. It was the truest thing he had, with the dollar amounts filed off. She told him, Nell told him, about a grandmother who loved her so much there'd be no room in it for her to be a person, and she watched her own mouth say it, and was horrified at how close to the bone it ran, and how good it felt to let even the boneless version of it out. What happened to her? Elliot asked. The grandmother. Nothing. She's still exactly who she is. Eleanor turned up another clam, looked at it, did not look at him. I left, that's all. There was a version of my life that everyone had agreed on, and it was a good version, by the rules they used. And one day I understood that if I lived it, I'd get to the end and nobody would have known me. They'd have known the use of me. And I left. She dropped the clam in the bucket. You think you'll feel brave when you do something like that. You don't. You feel like a thief. You feel like you stole yourself from people who thought they owned you. And the worst part is that you have to keep stealing yourself. Every day. Forever. Because they never stop sending people to bring you back. The tide breathed. Otis, who had been investigating a crab with deep professional concern, sneezed. And have they? Elliot asked, very carefully, in a voice he was holding level over a pit he could feel opening under his own feet. Sent people to bring you back? Not yet. She finally looked at him, and the look had a question in it she didn't say. Why are you asking it like that? A flicker of the wariness from the first morning. Why? No reason. It came out almost steady. You just sounded like you were waiting for someone. I'm always waiting for someone, said Eleanor Ashby, and turned it into a joke before it could be true. I work in a cafe. Hash isn't going to serve itself. She stood, knees mud to the hem, and held a hand down to him, and he took it. And for a second they were two muddy people on a clam flat, holding hands for no better reason than the one neither would say. And the tide came in around their boots, and neither of them stepped back. She made chowder that night in the closed cafe from their clams because she said it was the only honest thing to do with them, and they ate it at the counter with the lights low and the harbor dark in the windows, and Elliot Crane, who had been served meals on 3 continents by people paid to bow, ate the best meal of his life, standing up in a flannel shirt that wasn't his, while a dog snored under the stool, and thought, with a clarity that frightened him as badly as anything ever had, I would give all of it away to keep this. I have been trying to give all of it away. This is the all I was trying to give. He did not say it. The subtext he was learning was the whole point. He passed her the pepper instead, and she took it, and their hands brushed on the shaker, and that was the entire confession, and they both heard it. Small towns keep their own books, and by the 3rd week of September, the Hold had quietly opened an account on the matter of Nell and the quiet man with the no-taste dog. It was nothing cruel. It was the harbor's version of weather talk, the postmistress asking Sully, in front of 3 regulars, whether Eli was a keeper or just passing through, the way she'd ask about the tide. It was Dot from the hardware store, mentioning kindly, too kindly, the Pell said his lodger sat up half the night with the light on and never seemed to do any work a man could name. And wasn't that a funny thing for somebody just driving the coast? It was the slow, affectionate, suffocating arithmetic of a place where everyone knew everyone. and Eleanor felt it close around her like a tide coming up a flat. Not dangerous yet, but rising. And she of all people knew what it meant to be counted. "They're talking," she told Elliot, not as an accusation, sliding his coffee across the counter on a slow morning. "About you. About us. It's what they do. It's mostly harmless." She wiped a ring of water off the wood. "But I left a place where I was the thing everyone talked about, and I'd forgotten how the back of my neck feels when a room starts keeping track of me. So." She did not finish the "so." She did not have to. The micro question hung between them. Who are you, really, that a town can't place you? And she watched him not answer it, and filed the not answering with the other things she was not letting herself add up. And there was a second thing, smaller, that she told no one. A man had come to the marina that week. Not a tourist. A careful man in good shoes who asked the harbor master over a folded bill whether a young woman named Doyle worked the waterfront, and went away when the harbor master, who did not like good shoes, told him there were 6 Doyles in the county, and which one did he want? The harbor master mentioned it to Sully as a joke about Flatlanders. Sully did not think it was funny, and did not tell Nell, and watched her a little more closely after that, the way you watch weather you don't like the smell of. So the air around them was already charged the morning Eleanor overheard the phone call. And that is the way of it. The ground gives a little before it gives all the way. She had gone up the outside stair behind the hardware store to bring Pell's lodger the spare key Pell kept forgetting to hand over, and through the half-open window she heard Eli on the phone, and the voice coming out of him was not the voice he used in the cafe. It was lower, faster, edged with a fluency she had never heard him use on a screen door or a cup of hash. The voice of a man giving instructions to people who jumped when he gave them. "Then tell the board I'll sign whatever transfers it cleanly. I don't care about the optics, Daniel. I care that it's done before—" No, leave the foundation funded. That part is non-negotiable. I'll cover it personally if the board balks." A pause. Because some things aren't for the optics. Yes. Goodbye. Eleanor stood on the stair, with the spare key biting into her palm, and did not knock. The board, transfers, the foundation, cover it personally. Words from her old country, the country of men who moved fortunes around a breakfast table, the country she had crossed 2 years and 4 states to leave. And they were coming out of the mouth of a man who fixed screen doors, and tipped like he was apologizing. The back of her neck did the thing it had not done in 2 years. She set the key on the sill where he would find it, and went back down the stair, and said nothing, and added it to the column that was getting longer, and told herself it was nothing, and did not believe herself, and was, though she would not know it for another week, entirely right and entirely wrong at once. The thing that proved her, that proved who she really was, to the whole harbor and to the man pretending to drive the coast, did not come dressed as a revelation. It came dressed as an ordinary October Tuesday, the way the important things do. The Marisol came in heavy at the end of the morning tide, with a deckhand down on her boards. Eleanor was wiping the counter when she heard it. Not a scream, the harbor didn't scream, but the particular flat shout that means now, and the slap of running boots on the float, and Sully's son Pete in the doorway gone the color of dishwater, saying, "It's Hollis. It's old Hollis. He just dropped. He ain't breathing right." And before Pete had finished the sentence, Eleanor was already moving, already someone else, already the person she had trained 2 lives ago to be. She did not run exactly. She moved the way water moves downhill, without waste. Out the door, down the ramp, the diesel and bait reek of the float rising around her, and there on the boards was Hollis Quaid, 70 years old and gray as ash, and Eleanor went down onto her knees on the wet wood beside him, and her hands were already at his throat, his chest, and her voice came out level and enormous, in a way the cafe had never heard from quiet Nell who served the hash. "He's in arrest. Pete, call it in. Mainland medics. Tell them cardiac arrest on the town float. Conscious, unresponsive. And tell them how long they are out. I need the number. Go. You. To a gaping summer straggler. Back up. Give me air. Sully, I need the red bag from under your register. The one I made you buy. Go. Now. She had laced her hands on the old man's sternum and begun. And the count came out of her steady as a metronome. And the harbour stood in a ring around her and watched Nell Doyle, who dressed dog's paws and apologised for the trouble, hold a man's life open with her 2 hands and refuse to let it close. Elliot had come down the ramp with the rest and stopped at the edge of the ring, and he did not move to help, because the one useful thing he could do was stay out of the way of competence, and he had spent a year learning to recognise it. He watched her work. He watched her crack a breath into the old man and go back to the count without losing it, watched her snap an order at the medic on Pete's phone in a clipped, fluent vocabulary of milligrams and minutes that came from somewhere expensive and far away, watched her strip the wrapper off the thing in the red bag with her teeth because her hands were busy keeping her heart going. And he understood, standing on the float in the cold, several things at once. He understood that she had been a person of consequence before she was Nell. You did not learn that calm waiting tables. He understood that whatever she had run from, she had not run from being needed. She had run from being owned, which is the opposite thing. And she had carried the meeting with her and built a quiet life where she could do it for nothing, for an old fisherman on a wet board, for a stray dog in the rain, for no reward, especially for no reward. And he understood, with a completeness that closed his throat, that the 90 seconds on his doorstep a year ago had not been a fluke of weather. This was simply who she was when no one was keeping score. He had crossed a country to find a stranger, and found, instead, the truest person he had ever stood near. And she was on her knees on a float, bringing a heart back from the dark. And he loved her so much in that moment that it felt like a thing being done to him. The old man's chest heaved on its own. It was not television. It was worse and better. Hollis Quaid dragged in one terrible whooping breath, and then another, ugly and alive. And his eyes rolled and found nothing, and then found Nell. And Eleanor sat back on her heels on the wet boards, soaked to the knees, shaking now that the shaking was allowed, and put 2 fingers against the old man's throat and held them there counting, while the whole harbour let out a breath it had been holding with her. The mainland medics, when they finally came 31 minutes later, took one look at the line she'd kept and the notes Pete had scrawled at her dictation and asked her, professional to professional, where she practiced. "I don't," said Eleanor Doyle. "I serve breakfast." And she got up off the boards and walked back up the ramp on legs that didn't entirely work, past the man with the no-taste dog, who was looking at her as if a window had opened in a wall he'd thought was solid. And she did not meet his eyes, because she was afraid of what was in them, and because she had just shown the entire town the shape of the life she used to have. And a careful man in good shoes was somewhere asking the harbour master about a woman named Doyle, and the tide, she could feel it, was coming all the way up at last. That evening, Sully closed the cafe early, on account of the town needs feeding and gossiping in equal measure, and fed it. And the gossip, for once, was the good kind, the kind that knits a place tighter. Did you see Nell? Did you see her go? Old Hollis was gone, and she reached in and got him. And Eleanor sat in the corner booth, wrung out, and let Sully press a bowl of chowder on her she didn't want and couldn't finish. Elliot slid into the booth across from her with 2 coffees and the dog, who arranged himself across both their feet like a small gray treaty. "You're going to ask me how I know how to do that," she said before he could. Flat, braced. "No." He set a coffee in front of her. "I'm going to tell you that you left a $40 tip in the form of an old man's whole remaining life, and that I've watched a lot of important people in a lot of important rooms, and not one of them ever did a single thing that mattered as much as what you did on that float. And most of them would tell you the difference between them and you is the size of the stage." He turned his mother's steel watch once around his wrist. "I think the difference is that you do it on any stage. Or none. I think that's the whole difference between people, actually, when you boil it all the way down. Whether they do the thing with the lights off." She looked at him for a long moment. The cafe murmured around them. "That," she said, "is a strangely specific thing for a man driving the coast to have opinions about. I have a lot of time to think these days. I'm between things." A pause, and then she would remember that it was here, that it was this exact moment. The quiet man did a thing he had not done once in 6 weeks. He deadpanned. "Although after today, I'm reconsidering. The hospitality industry clearly has range. This morning you ran a code on a float, and tonight you've been handed a bowl of chowder you're legally required to finish, or Sully takes it personally. It's a demanding sector." Eleanor laughed. It surprised her out of herself. A real laugh, startled, the chowder spoon halfway up. Because the joke was small and dry and perfectly placed, and came from a man she had not known could make one. And the novelty of it, the newness of him being funny, did something to the center of her she had been very carefully not letting anything do. "Was that a joke?" she said. "Did you make a joke?" "My first in some time. Be gentle, I'm out of practice." He was almost smiling. The dog sighed against their feet. "I'm told it's character development." "It needs work." "Most new things do." And he said it lightly, looking at the dog and not at her. But the word things sat on the table between them next to I'm between things. And they both heard the second meaning under it, the one about new things that need work and might be worth the working. And neither of them touched it. And that restraint was its own kind of touch. The morning before everything broke was, in the way of these things, the best one they had. It came at the end of that good week. Hollis home and ornery. The town warmed to Nell in a way that had nothing to do with where she came from. The careful man in good shoes apparently moved on. Elliot had taken to coming in before the cafe opened, on the theory that a man who fixes things can let himself in. And on this particular grey-gold morning, Eleanor found him already there when she came down, the urn going, the bell over the door fixed so well it no longer announced him. Otis asleep in the square, where the sun would land when it cleared the hardware store. They did the thing they had somehow started doing without anyone deciding it. She baked the day's biscuits, and he was no use at it, and proved it. And she gave him the one job he couldn't ruin, which was the dog's breakfast. And he held up the bag of gourmet biscuits he'd brought up from the city, the absurd, expensive ones, a holdover from his old life. And Otis turned his nose up at them with the contempt of a connoisseur, and went and sat pointedly by the cheap supermarket box on the shelf. "He won't eat them," Elliot said, betrayed. "They cost more than the chowder." "Of course he won't. He has no taste." She did not look up from the biscuit dough. She was smiling at it. "It's why he likes you. We've established this. Give him the cheap ones, you snob, and stop trying to buy a dog's good opinion. It can't be done. I've seen people try." She floured her hands. "When the summer people come back next year, they'll bring him steak off the grill, and he'll walk away and come sit by my register because I keep the cheap box. You watch. He's the only honest critic on the eastern seaboard." Next year. She had said it without flinching. Next year. A whole future tense laid down on the flowered counter, as if it were nothing. As if, of course, there would be a next year. As if Eli, who was between things, and Nell, who served breakfast, and the no-taste dog, would all still be here when the summer people came back. And she heard herself say it, and did not snatch it back, and Elliot heard her say it, and went very still over the dog's bowl so as not to startle the moment off its branch. "I'll watch," he said, carefully, like a man holding a full cup on a moving boat. "Next year." "Next year," she agreed. And the sun came over the hardware store exactly then and landed in the square on the floor, and the dog got up and turned around 3 times and lay back down in the warm of it with a grunt, and the whole cafe smelled of flour and coffee, and the particular green salt morning smell of a harbour that has decided, for one day, to be kind. And Eleanor Ashby, who had built her freedom on needing no one, stood in a borrowed apron beside a man with a false name and a true heart, and let herself, for the length of one risen batch of biscuits, simply be happy. It is the cruelty of stories like this one that the happiness is real. It was not a trick the morning played. They were, the two of them, briefly and completely, inside the life they were about to lose. And the only one who knew it was coming was the careful man in good shoes, 100 miles south, sliding a folded report across a wrought iron table to an old woman among her orchids. The letter came the way the worst things come, in the most ordinary mail, on a Tuesday. It was not addressed to Nell Doyle. It was addressed, in the heavy formal hand of a law firm, to Eleanor Ashby, care of The Hold, Wexley Cove, which meant that the one rule, the foundation, the never-be-findable, had failed, and that someone with Vivian Ashby's resources had located a granddaughter who had spent 2 years being unlocatable. And Eleanor stood in the cafe, holding an envelope with her real name on it, and felt the small, true life she had built tip all the way over at last. She knew the cadence before she opened it, the way you know a parent's footstep. Frankly, the letter would begin, because Vivian's letters always began by telling you the lie that what followed was candor. Frankly, Eleanor, this has gone on long enough. She did not have to read it to hear it. She read it anyway, in the back room with the door shut, her hand pressed white against the old enamel sink. Frankly, Eleanor, this charade has cost the family enough. You are an Ashby whether or not you are presently wearing an apron. You will come home, where there is a future that has been kept for you at no small expense, and we will discuss the terms of your return like adults. A car will come on Friday. Do not make it necessary to send a second one. V.A. But it was not the letter that broke her. She had survived the letter the moment she recognized the handwriting. It was the line at the bottom, the postscript in a different ink. A small, dry note from the family's man of affairs, meant for Vivian's eyes and left in by carelessness or design. Located via the Crane Harbour Clinic grant filings. Subject treated an animal at a Crane-funded facility under the Doyle alias. Cross-referenced through the grant network. Recommend discretion. The Crane connection is unconfirmed, but the chairman has been personally and unusually involved in the relevant region for some months. She read it 3 times. Crane Harbour. The Crane-funded clinic. The chairman, personally and unusually involved in the relevant region for some months. A man who had come to Wexley Cove with no end date and no reason, who fixed doors that weren't his, who had said he has no taste, it's why he likes you, on his first morning, as if he had said it to her before, who had asked, on a clam flat, in a voice held too level, have they sent people to bring you back? And a grey dog who threw himself at her shins as if she were a wall he had been promised. A grey dog with a year-old scar on his back left pad. She walked out of the back room into the empty cafe where Elliot, Eli, was up on a chair fixing the bell over the door so it would stop sticking, and Otis was asleep in a square of sun. And she stood very still and said, in a voice scrubbed of everything, "Take his foot, the back left one. Show me." Elliot went cold on the chair. He understood, in one falling second, that the whole year had arrived. Nell. His back left foot. She crossed the cafe and crouched and took the dog's paw herself, gently, because she was gentle even now, even falling, and turned it. And there it was. A thin, pale seam through the pad, healed exactly the way a wound heals when someone cleans it right and dresses it right, and tells a stranger not to let the dog chew it. The dressing she had made in the rain 13 months ago. The dog she had carried, wrapped in her own coat, to the door of a house the size of a bank. The man on the other side of that door, who had offered her a reward, whom she had told to latch his gate. "It's the same dog," she said. She was not asking. She set the paw down with great care, the way you set down something you cannot afford to break, because you are about to break everything else. "It's the same dog. And you're the same man, and you've known since the morning you walked in here. He has no taste. It's why he likes you." She stood. Her voice did not rise. That was the worst part, Elliot would think later. It would have been easier if she'd screamed. "I said that to you. On your doorstep, in the rain, a year ago." "Eleanor, don't!" The real name in his mouth landed like a slap, confirming the last of it. "Don't you dare use it like you just learned it. How long have you known who I am?" "I didn't. I swear to you I didn't. Not until you just said your own name. I never." He came down off the chair. The dog woke and looked between them, distressed. "I knew you'd brought my dog back. I knew that the day I walked in. I didn't know anything else. I came here because a clinic I funded found a record of someone who dressed a wound the way you dressed Otis's. And you funded the clinic." She laughed, and it was the worst sound he had ever heard, because it had grief in it, dressed up as understanding. "Of course you did. The flyers, the clinics, all of it. You built an entire net across 4 states to catch one person who didn't want to be caught. And you walked into my life with a false name and let me. You let me." She stopped. Her hand had gone to her own earlobe, pressing, the old self-soothing tell, and she made it stop. "I treated you like a stranger who'd come in off the road. Sully said you weren't chasing me. I believed him. I let you dig clams in my one safe place. And the whole time you were the gate. You were the thing I ran from with a better coat and a sweeter dog." "That's not true," he wanted to say, and could not, because the brutal arithmetic of it was true on its face. He had funded the clinics. He had used the grant network. He had come with a false name. Every fact she had was a real fact, and the only thing she had wrong was the meaning. And meaning was the one thing he had no way to prove, standing in a cafe with a year of deception arranged behind him like evidence. And here is where the dark night closed over them. And it closed because they were both, in that moment, most certain of their oldest lies. Eleanor's lie was, to be loved is to be owned. To be found is to be claimed. And she stood in the wreck of her safe life, with proof, real proof, that the one man she had let in had found her, the way her grandmother found things, with money, with a net, with a name on a form. And the lie roared up and told her the truth she had always known, that she was an asset, that she would always be an asset, that even love, when it came for her, came holding a ledger. Maybe he was sent. Maybe Vivian sent him. Maybe the whole thing, the dog, the door, the clams, the chowder. Maybe it was all the most expensive way anyone had ever tried to bring me home. She knew it wasn't likely. The lie does not care about likely. The lie only cares about old. And Elliot's lie was anyone who stays is staying for what I own. And so when she looked at him with that grief and that certainty, the lie told him she was right to, that of course she was leaving, that he had finally been close enough to a real thing to feel its leaving, and that the leaving was simply the bill coming due for a man like him, who could fund 100 clinics and tape 1,000 flyers, and still, at the bottom of it, only ever be a gate. "I have to go," she said. "There's a car coming Friday. I'm not going to be here when it comes, and I'm not going to be here when you're here either, because I can't tell anymore which parts of the last 6 weeks were real and which parts were the search, and I can't afford to find out slowly. I did slow once. It cost me 26 years. She was already untying her apron, already a woman in motion, already the smear crossing out of frame. "Lock up when you go. You're good at fixing the door. Leave it better than you found it. That's more than most people manage." Eleanor. He did not move toward her. He had learned distances. He stood in the middle of the cafe with his hands open and empty and said the only thing he had that was not an argument. I never used the agency. She stopped at the door. My father had an agency. They find people who don't want to be found. It's how he ran his whole life. It's how I was raised to run mine. And the day the vet told me a stranger had dressed my dog's wound like a professional, I had their number in my phone. And I could have had your name and your address and your entire history by morning. And I didn't call them. I taped flyers in laundromats for a year, like a lunatic, because the only way I could think to look for you that wasn't the gate, that wasn't the thing you stepped back from on my doorstep, was to make it so that you'd have to choose to be found. I built the clinics so there'd be a door open near you with my hand on it, and then I prayed you'd walk through one on your own. You did. You weren't caught, Eleanor. A net doesn't work if the person has to choose to step into it. That's not a net. That's a candle in a window. She did not turn around. Her shoulders were a held line he recognized from a rainy doorstep. The line of a person not running, because running would mean it mattered. That's a very good speech, she said. You've always been good at the thing the moment requires. And she walked out into the bright, cold September street and crossed it without hurrying, and did not look back. And Elliot Crane stood for the second time in a year and watched her go. Except this time, he knew her name, and this time it was worse. Because this time, he had not lost a stranger. He had lost the one person who had ever made him feel like more than a position. And he had lost her by being, in the end, exactly the kind of man who could find anyone. The dog whined at the door she had closed. Elliot picked him up. I know, he said into the grey fur. I know. He did not go after her that night, which cost him everything to manage, and was the only right thing he did. He had learned, over a year, that the worst thing he could do to Eleanor Ashby was to chase her, and so he made himself sit in the room above the hardware store, with the dog and the dark, and his mother's steel watch turning around and around his wrist. And he did the hardest arithmetic of his life, which was not financial. He asked himself what he actually wanted, underneath the wanting of her, and he found, at the bottom of it, a thing that shamed him. He wanted to be chosen. That was all. That was the whole wound, the whole engine, the thing his father's fortune had made impossible. He wanted one person in the world to look at him with nothing on the form and stay. And he understood, sitting there, that he had spent a year trying to engineer being chosen, which is the one thing that cannot be engineered, and that even his beautiful candle in the window had been, in the end, a clever man's attempt to arrange a free choice, and that if he loved her, and he did, hopelessly, the way you love the thing that shows you who you are, then the only move left to him was to take his hand off the scale entirely. So he did not go to her. He went instead to the source. Because Eleanor was wrong about one thing, and he had the resources to be right about it. There was a car coming Friday, and a grandmother behind it, and a future, kept at no small expense, and a man like Crispin Vale somewhere in the wings. And none of that had anything to do with Elliot. But all of it had everything to do with whether Eleanor would ever again be able to choose anything freely. She would run from Wexley Cove, and the Ashby machine would follow, because that was what it did. And she would spend the rest of her life as a smear crossing out of frame. And the one thing Elliot Crane could actually do for her, the one thing his money was good for, the only thing it had ever been good for, was to make the machine stop. He drove south through the night. He did not call ahead. There was, again, no ahead to call. Vivian Ashby received him in the conservatory of a house that made Elliot's own look modest. Among orchids she tended herself, because, she said, they were the only employees who did not disappoint her. She was 81, and built of the same material as her glaciers, and she examined Elliot Crane across a wrought iron table with the frank, pricing regard of a woman who had appraised men her whole life and rarely been surprised by the figure. Crane Harbor, she said. Gerald's boy. I knew your father a little. A cold man with a warm balance sheet. She poured tea she did not offer to let him refuse. Frankly, Mr. Crane, I have spent a week being told that my granddaughter's hermitage has somehow become entangled with a shipping fortune, and I have not enjoyed a moment of it. So let us be efficient, as I'm sure your father taught you to be. What is it you imagine you've come here to buy? And Elliot, who had come a year and a country to learn how to be a person instead of a position, and who now found himself across a table from the very engine that had made Eleanor flee positions forever, chose, deliberately, not to be efficient. Nothing, he said. I'm not here to buy anything. I'm here to give you something, and then I'm going to ask you for nothing, which I understand is not how this family conducts itself, so it may take a moment to land. Vivian's cup paused a half-inch above its saucer. It was a small thing. He had spent a year learning to read small things. I'm going to give you the truth about your granddaughter, Elliot said, and you're not going to like it, and I have no leverage to make you sit through it except that you're curious. And a woman who tends her own orchids is always more curious than she lets on. He set down his own untouched tea. Eleanor didn't run because she's ungrateful. She ran because every person who has ever loved her has loved her as a use, including you, especially you. You love her the way you love these flowers, completely, and as a possession. And the difference between those two things is the entire reason she's washing dishes in a town you'd need a map to find. He watched the old woman's face and saw nothing move and kept going, because he had nothing to lose, and that, he had learned, is the only position from which a person can finally tell the truth. I spent a year looking for her. I had every tool your man of affairs has, and better ones. I didn't use a single one of them to take her choice away, because I'd already watched her have her choice taken away her whole life. And I would rather lose her free than keep her caught. And I'd like you, for the first time in her life, to do the same. Here is the part Eleanor did not see, because she was 100 miles away packing a duffel bag in the dark and telling herself it didn't hurt. After Elliot had said his piece, after he had laid the whole year on the wrought iron table and asked for nothing and risen to go, Vivian Ashby sat alone in her conservatory among the orchids, and she did a thing her granddaughter had never once seen her do, the thing no one was permitted to witness, which is why it counted. She crossed to a cabinet at the far end of the glass room and took out a photograph in a plain frame, not the silver ones that stood on the grand piano for guests, but a small, worn one she kept where guests did not go. It was a photograph of a girl of about 6, gap-toothed, holding a clam rake too big for her, grinning on a mudflat, taken before the empire had finished closing over the family like water over a stone. The girl was Vivian, 75 years gone. Before the hotels, before the will like a glacier, before she had learned that the only safe way to love a thing was to own it. She stood with the photograph in her 2 old hands and ran her thumb across the glass, across the face of a girl who had once dug clams sideways and wanted nothing she could not carry. And she did not weep, because she had unlearned that decades ago. But her thumb moved on the glass, as if she were trying to rub away a dust that was on the inside. And then she put the photograph back, exactly where it had been, and stood a while longer in the green glass quiet. And when she finally turned away from the cabinet, something in the set of her shoulders had changed that no one was there to see. She made one telephone call that night. She did not raise her voice. Vivian Ashby never had to. "Cancel Friday's car," she said, "and tell the Vale people the arrangement is concluded. No, I'm aware of the cost. I'm aware of all of it. Conclude it." A pause, the orchids breathing their faint, sweet rot around her. "And find me the number of a cafe in a town called Wexley Cove. I'll place that call myself." Eleanor did not leave Wexley Cove on Thursday night, though she meant to, though the duffel was packed, and the bus schedule was memorized, and every cell in her 2 years-trained body was screaming, "Go before the car comes. Go before he comes. Go before either of them can put a name on you again." She did not leave because of Sully, who found her at midnight sitting on the closed cafe's back step with the bag at her feet, and who sat down beside her without a word, the way he did everything, and finally said, scraping at nothing with his thumbnail, "You're going to run." "There's a car coming tomorrow, from the place I left, and Eli's not who he said he was. He's—" She stopped. The whole shape of it was too large for the back step. "He's the one who's been looking for me, the whole time. He found me with money. I let him in, and the entire time he was the thing I ran from." Sully was quiet for a while. The harbor knocked its boats together in the dark. "My wife," he said eventually, which startled her, because Sully never spoke of his wife. 40 years. You know how I met her? She backed her car into mine in the lot behind the church and got out swinging because she'd decided it was my fault before she was out of the seat. Worst temper in 3 counties. I spent 40 years being found by that woman every single day, found whether I wanted to be or not. He scraped his thumbnail. Being found's not the crime, Nell. Your people up the coast, they found you to own you. That's the crime. The question's never whether somebody found you. Somebody always finds you, if you're worth the looking. The question is what they do once they have you in their hand. He stood, knees cracking, and looked down at her and the bag. Man fixed my door. Man fixed my door and my bell, and didn't tell me his right name, and dug clams like a fool in your one safe spot, and the only thing he ever asked anybody in this town for was a cup of coffee and the hash. You decide that's a hunter, you go on and run. But you've been running 2 years, and I've watched you, and I'll tell you what I see. He paused at the corner of the building. I see somebody who finally got found by someone who opened their hand, and I think it scared you worse than the ones who kept theirs closed. Lock up the back when you decide. Either way. She did not run on Thursday night. She was still in Wexley Cove on Friday, behind the counter at the Hold, sleeves shoved up, hands shaking just slightly as she poured, watching the road for a car that did not come. And at 10:30, the cafe's old wall phone rang, the one nobody called, and Sully answered it, and went still, and held it out to her with a look she could not read. For you, he said. Says her name's Vivian. Eleanor took the phone the way you take hold of a live wire. The harbor breathed in the windows, and down 100 miles of telephone line, in a voice she had braced her whole life to defend against. Her grandmother said the one sentence Eleanor had been certain she would never hear, because it had a question in it. And Vivian Ashby did not ask sincere questions. Eleanor, the car isn't coming, and the veil business is finished. And I find that I have spent 81 years and I do not actually know. A pause. The first uncertain pause her granddaughter had ever heard her take. I do not know the name of a single thing you love. Will you tell me one? Just one. To start. And Eleanor Ashby stood in a harbour cafe, with her hand pressed white against the counter, and her grandmother's impossible question in her ear. And outside the window, the September light came hard and gold off the water, and she understood that the machine had stopped, that someone had reached into the engine of her entire life and pulled out the part that crushed, and that she did not have to wonder who. She found him at the end of the breakwater, which is where this began. He had not come to the cafe. He had not come to her room. He had, Pell told her, settled his bill above the hardware store that morning and said he was leaving, and gone to stand at the end of the broken pier with the dog, the way a man stands when he has decided not to be a thing a person has to run from. Out in the open, easy to leave, easy to walk away from. A candle and not a net. The wind came in sideways off the cove, carrying salt and the iron smell of coming rain. And Eleanor walked the wet granite toward him, and the dog reached her first, leaning his whole grey weight against her shins. And she put her hand down into his fur without looking, and she said to the harbour, "You found me. It took you a year." "A little more than a year." He kept his distance. He had learned distances. 391 days, if you want the number. I stopped being able to round it down a while ago. And the rain started, the way it did around her. And she turned and looked at him, and asked the only question she had left. "Why?" she said. "Why would you try that hard for a stranger, who wouldn't even tell you her name?" And Elliot Crane, who had rehearsed nothing, who had given away the thing he loved rather than hold it court, who had taken his hand off every scale he owned, told her the truth, which was not a speech, because the moment did not require a speech, only a fact. And he had finally learned the difference. "Because you handed my dog back wrapped in your own coat," he said, "and you were shivering. And when I offered you money, you looked at me like I'd offered you something smaller than what you'd just done. And I had been alive 34 years at that point, and I don't think one single person had ever looked at me and seen something they'd rather have than my money." The rain ran off his jaw. He did not wipe it away. "I didn't spend a year finding you because I wanted to catch you, Eleanor. I spent a year finding you because, for about 90 seconds on my own doorstep, in the worst weather of the fall, I got to be a person instead of a gate. And I would have torn the whole world apart to feel that one more time. I gave the company to Daniel. Did you know that? I signed it last week. I'm not a billionaire who found you. I'm a man who used to be one, who learned to fix a screen door, who has a no-taste dog and a rented room and absolutely nothing on the form. That's all I've got left to offer you. Nothing on the form." His voice finally broke, just slightly, on the last of it. "I know it's not how your family does things. I'm hoping it's the only thing you ever actually wanted." And that stopped her cold. Not the way grief stops you, the way the truth does. The way her grandmother's question had. The way a thing you stopped believing was possible stops you when it walks up in a flannel shirt and stands in the rain at a careful distance and offers you, at last, an open hand. She did not run. She crossed the careful distance herself. That was the thing, in the end, that mattered, that she was the one who closed it. And she took 2 fistfuls of his rained-on wool coat the way you take hold of a thing you have decided to be careful with. And she pressed her forehead to his sternum, where the dog had pressed his weight to her shins. And she felt his arms come around her, slow and disbelieving, holding her the way you hold something you've spent a year being certain you'd lost. And the rain came down on both of them, and the dog wove between their 4 legs in an ecstasy of reunion. And she said into the cold coffee, rained-on wool smell of him, in a voice scrubbed of everything but the one true thing left under it, "You should have latched the gate. None of this would have happened." "Worst mistake I never made," said Elliot Crane. And she felt him laugh, the laugh of a man learning he was allowed to. And she laughed, too, into his coat, the off-balance laugh of a woman setting down a duffel bag she had been carrying for 2 years. And the harbor breathed against the pilings. And somewhere, a long way south, an old woman stood among her orchids and did not yet know the name of a single thing her granddaughter loved, but had, for the first time in her glacial life, asked. They were married the following June, in the off-season quiet of Wexley Cove, in the church between the hardware store and the cafe, with the whole working harbor crowded into the pews because Nell, from the hold, was one of theirs. And Eli, who fixed things, had somehow, over a winter of fixing things, become one too. It was not a large wedding by the standards of either fortune they had each, in their different ways, walked away from. Sully gave her away, and pretended the whole time that he had something in his eye. Margot came up from the city and cried exactly once, briefly, into a handkerchief she then used to swat Elliot for keeping it from her so long, and informed Eleanor across the reception that she had good standards, a thing this family has needed for a generation, which, from Margot, was the deed to the kingdom. Daniel Okafor toasted his former chairman as the only man I ever met who got richer by giving it all away, and meant it, and ran Crane Harbor better than Gerald ever had, with the names of the people on the loading docks in his phone. And Vivian Ashby came. She came in a plain car, with no entourage, and she sat in the third pew in a coat that cost more than the church, and she watched her granddaughter marry a man with nothing on the form. And afterward she came to Eleanor in the churchyard with the June light going gold off the harbor, and she did not say frankly, and she did not appraise anyone, and she took from her bag the small, worn photograph in the plain frame, the gap-toothed girl with the clam rake too big for her hands, and she put it into her granddaughter's hands and closed Eleanor's fingers around it. "That was me," Vivian said. "Before. I'd forgotten her. I've spent a year being unable to forget her, since a cold man's warm-hearted son sat in my conservatory and told me I love things the way I own them." Her old voice did not shake. She had unlearned that. Her thumb, though, moved once across the back of Eleanor's hand, the way it had moved across the glass. "I don't know how to do it the other way. And 82. It may be too late to learn. But I should like to try, if you'll let an old woman practice on you badly for a while. I should like to know the name of the things you love." She glanced, just once, at Elliot across the churchyard, kneeling to free the dog's leash from a fence post, getting his good suit filthy, delighted. "I believe I can guess one of them. His name's Otis," said Eleanor Ashby, who would in an hour be Eleanor Crane, and who had, after 2 years of needing nothing, finally let herself need a great many things, and found that the world did not end. "The dog. His name is Otis, and he has no taste, which is the only reason any of us are standing here." She looked down at the gap-toothed girl in the photograph, and up at the grandmother who had asked, and she put her free hand on the old woman's arm, which neither of them had done in 20 years. "Come on, I'll introduce you properly, both of them, and then you're going to learn to dig clams, because you're an Ashby, whether or not you're presently wearing a good coat. And Ashbys, it turns out, come at things sideways." They walked together across the churchyard, toward the man and the dog and the harbor, and the whole small, true, unfindable life Eleanor had built, and very merely run from. And the June wind came in sideways off the cove, carrying salt and the green smell of summer instead of rain. And behind them, on a hand-lettered sign, the cafe announced that it was, as ever, open. Otis got into the wedding cake. Nobody minded. He had, after all, found everyone.